Alright, so this video is going to be all about building muscle with low loads, the type of training you would do at home. Alright, so this is a video in the FazLifts educational series. I will be putting this one out on the members site as well as making this one available for public viewing on my Instagram. So let's crack on. Now what we'll cover today is why does this apply to us now? We're going to define muscle failure, look at the study design, what I want to talk through today, and look at the study results and give you some brief take-home points. So, in terms of why does this apply to us now? For most people, lockdown will mean a reduction in the available equipment. So most people won't have access to a full gym. They'll be training at home with either zero equipment or a few bits and bobs that they manage to pick up. Some people might have some dumbbells, some bands, just a variety of things, or just body weight, right? So we need to know whether we can still gain or at least maintain some muscle with home workouts. That's the purpose of this video, to inform you about the ability for your home workout to actually be useful or not. Because the motivation to do any endeavor is directly proportional to the perceived likelihood that that endeavor will bring about the desired results. So what that means in shorthand is you're only going to do something if you feel like it's going to benefit you. Okay, so you're only going to train if you feel you get something out of it. Nobody does training for absolutely zero reason, just to pass time. Okay, even if it's just for the sheer enjoyment of it, most people who are looking for home workouts are looking for something to do which is going to be productive. So, and actually this is the basis of learned helplessness in psychology. We stop doing things that we don't feel will help because they don't seem to be really worthwhile doing. This is in extreme cases of diet failure. I've had people come to me where they've got a learned helplessness with regards to this diet in general, and you've really got to kickstart them to get them out of that, to give them that belief again. But anyway, this is why this applies to us now. We're all in a situation where we're in lockdown and we need to know whether the things that we're doing at home are actually worth doing, because that will affect our motivation. It will affect our motivation to do those things, and that will then have a knock-on effect to the rest of our lives. Like, well, if we're not going to train, then maybe we're not going to eat right, and maybe we're not going to do etc, etc, and then it's just bad for our health. But if we have a firm understanding that actually the home workouts that we're doing are beneficial and we can actually build muscle, then it's worthwhile. Then it becomes much more worthwhile to do those exercises and do that training and keep up with it. So, firstly, I want to define what muscular failure is for the purpose of this discussion that I'm about to show you. Because I don't think many people really realize what muscular failure is. And it gets bandied about a lot, but I think there are subjective markers that you need to pay attention to know that you're actually failing and not just grimacing a lot and making a lot of noise and, you know, making it look good for Instagram. Because I see a lot of that. I see a lot of people just grimacing and then the set just ends. It's like, hold on, we didn't even struggle. So I've drawn a sort of scale of reps. So basically this is where the start of the set is. So that's the start of the set here. Now as we go along, we do rep after rep after rep after rep after rep, okay? It gets to the point here where it starts to get difficult. This is where the bar speed starts to slow down. Now, this is kind of the point where I see people stopping the set and saying it's failure. I've even seen some recently where on their Instagram stories where they say they're going to failure, or they're known as the, you know, the 2 set to failure guys. And there's no slowing down of the bar. It starts to get difficult, the partner comes in to assist, and all of a sudden the set is over with, and you're like, well, where's failure? But the first indication that you're approaching failure should be that the bar speed starts to slow down. So if you're doing something like a press up or whatever, your body will start to slow down. As your strength starts to decline during the course of the set, your speed of movement should start to slow down. Now, if that doesn't happen, you didn't hit failure. You just gave out. After that, maybe 1 or 2 reps after that, that's when you hit muscle failure. Now, muscle failure is defined by the inability for the movement to keep going. So you literally just stop midway through your tracks. And no matter how hard you push or pull, you can't go any further. Now, imagine, you know, failing on a press up. For a guy who's pretty strong, that's quite hard to do. Like, most people are going to fail at press up maybe 30 to 40 reps down the line, not like 6 to 8 reps or 10 to 12 reps. So if you're relatively strong and you're doing things with reasonable form, so you're actually doing a press up with the proper form, then you'll probably get a fair few reps out and then hit muscular failure. But bear in mind, prior to just dropping down and wiping your brow and looking on Instagram and going, wow, what a workout, the bar, you should slow down. Okay, if you don't slow down, odds are you didn't hit muscle failure, you just gave out in your head. So this is how things should go. Start the set, rep after rep after rep, things then start to slow down. We know they're getting difficult because objectively we can see ourselves slowing down. Feel free to videotape yourself, see yourself slowing down, and at a certain point, maybe 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 reps after that, you then hit failure where you cannot physically move, and that's when you stop the set. Now, after that is beyond failure, and that is out of the scope of what we're doing here, but that would involve changing your body position, which is generally called a mechanical drop set, or perhaps getting a partner to assist, which is sometimes called forced reps, or lowering the load, called the drop set as well. So either one of those. But we're not really interested in beyond failure for today. So now we know what failure is, it's important to know that. So there was a study that was done last year, published by Schoenfeld, Longo, I think it was 2019 anyway. But the idea was they wanted to test whether low loads and high loads were going to produce the same hypertrophy, and they wanted to test whether going to failure and not going to failure would produce the same hypertrophy, same muscle growth. So what they got was two groups of people. Now, this is a really well put together study because with the two groups of people, they tested each leg separately, which is really cool. So you don't get a discrepancy from group to group because actually two groups are the same person. So within the first group, they used all high loads, and the second group was all low loads. So for each person, the one of the legs, let's say the left leg, went to failure, and the right leg used the same load and didn't go to failure. They just did more sets to kind of make up the volume, if you see what I mean. So as an example, let's say the first group, left leg, did 3 sets of 10 to failure. Well, what would happen was the first group, next leg, the second leg, would still do 80%, okay? But rather than doing 3 sets of 10, they would do something like sets of 6. So they would stop short, like 4 reps, you know? Something like 60% of the reps in that set. So that left them with room to do more sets. So 3 sets of 10 was like 30 reps. And then the sets of 6 group had to do more sets. I think it was like 5 sets basically. So 5 sets of 6. So they did the same total reps, but they didn't go to failure. They stayed well away from failure actually. So that was the first group. Same load, both legs. One leg went to failure, other leg didn't go to failure, but did the same amount of volume. So we can't say the volume was higher or lower. That's not a factor in it. It was just they did the same volume, they just didn't go to failure. Now, the second group, they did, that was the low load group. So with one leg, they took a load, low load. It was roughly 30% of 1 rep max. They took that set to failure. In the second leg of the second group, the other leg, they took the same 30%, but they didn't go to failure. And again, they just equated it to volume. So they did more reps in more sets to get the same amount of volume. So just to summarize, first group was a high load group, 1 leg to failure, 1 leg not to failure. Second group, low load group, 1 leg to failure, 1 leg not to failure. If you're all with me so far. All right, so let's look at the results. So the results were actually really interesting, fairly predictable, I guess, depends on what side of the fence you're on. So on the left-hand side, you'll see muscular growth. Now, I've put in this red line here just for perspective. So the left was the cross-sectional area. So that is the size of the thigh. That was on the left. So the black bar here is the high load to failure. Second bar with the checkers is the high load not to failure. Then you had the low load to failure, then the low load not to failure. So these were the measurements all before. You can see they're all about the same. Okay, all before, roughly about the same. And then afterwards, we look at the results. So they had grown a little bit. The first group had grown, second group had grown, third group had grown. In fact, the first 3 groups had all grown pretty much the same, you know, statistically within the same parameters. The last group had grown a little bit, but nowhere near. You can see from this graphic here, the first 3 groups grew the most. The last group grew the least. So let's remind ourselves, what was the last group? The last group was the low load, not to failure. They grew like a little bit, but not very much. So with this, we are clear to see that high loads to failure, great for growth. High loads not to failure, great for growth. and balance for, volume. Low loads to failure, just as good for growth as the high loads. That's amazing, right? So long as you go to failure. And then the low loads not to failure got minuscule growth, hardly anything. And they also tested a 1 rep max. So you can see here, 1 rep max went up appropriately. 1 rep max went up more with the high loads, as you'd expect. Strength is a very specific thing. So while you can get growth from the low loads, you won't necessarily get that much stronger, which makes sense because we know there's other aspects of strength which aren't just the training you do. It has to be specific. So I found this really interesting. So just to summarize, what this is saying is, if you are going to be training at home, if you are going to be doing home workouts, make sure you're taking those workouts to failure. So here are my own personal take-home points for you guys. Firstly, training with low loads, the type of stuff you do at home, can induce just as much growth as high loads to failure in some training populations. This was done with active people who play sports but who aren't resistance trained. So that will influence the results slightly, but the trend is still there. Okay, it's still a good indication that if we are going to be training at home, we should still try and train to failure if we're aiming to at least maintain muscle growth, even to gain a little bit of muscle depending on our experience size. So training with low loads can induce just as much growth as high loads to failure in some populations. Next point, if you are training at home, sets should be taken to failure. Okay, so if you're doing stuff at home, should be taking those sets to failure. So you've got to be able to train with exercises that are sufficiently difficult enough for you to take them to failure. So for most people, push-ups in the any routine like 5 to 40 range will be taking them to failure. That's good. Do that. Okay. Squats, unless you're fairly unfit, squats are probably not going to be the thing to take to failure because you might get to like 50 to 60 reps. And the difficulty there is that becomes extremely hard to do. I would recommend people really focus on single leg exercises like split squats, staggered stance squats, and stuff like that. And if you are going to do those, just make sure you're doing them continuously. I don't like this idea of doing a set and then having breaks for breath halfway through it, because all you're doing there is you're extending the point it takes to get to failure. If you do a set of say 30, that could be the failure. But if you insist on taking a rest, like they say you do squats, the split squats, if you insist on resting at rep 25 so you can get a few more reps out, then rest again, get a few more, and rest again, get a few more, well, all you're doing is extending the set. You want to reach failure. You want to reach honest failure, so don't just wuss out, but you want to reach failure. So try not to do that situation where you're just extending the sets out. Minimize your rest periods and just do the work. Get the set over and done with continuously, with good form, full range of motion. Actually move past the point where your reps start to slow down and to the point where you reach muscle failure. That would be a good looking set, and that would give you the best chance at actually gaining some muscle tissue. Right. If you found this useful, please like, share, and subscribe to me on Instagram. And great, give me some feedback. All right, thank you. Hope you found that useful.